One of the things a lot of people are feeling around COVID is this sense of powerlessness. Sometimes when that happens, we want to blame something for all this change that's happening. And sometimes that's being manifested in some places as backlash against species that people maybe were already predisposed to carry fear for. But bats really shouldn't be feared. They are a really important part of our natural ecosystems. They're part of our biodiversity, and they just don't pose a threat. There is no risk from a bat of getting COVID. This is not a virus that is circulating in wildlife populations right now, posing risk to people. The risk of contracting COVID is really from getting it from another person who is sick. Bats are not a health risk in this way whatsoever. This plate here is a group called the Rhinolophus, and this is part of an old world family of bats. And their common name is the horseshoe bats, and they have these really cool facial features here that look like a little horseshoe. So these are drawings that were originally, part of like a field guide. I just love them because they're great examples of bat species we find around the world. My name is Dr. Winifred Frick, and I'm the Chief Scientist at Bat Conservation International. Our organization's mission is dedicated to protecting bat populations around the world and ensuring that no bats go extinct. The most fun parts of that job are getting out into the field and working with bats in their habitats where they need to be protected. Right now at Bat Conservation International, we have put a temporary pause on any field work, in part because we're all abiding by the shelter-in-place and travel restrictions that are in place, and in part because a lot of our work does require PPE, personal protective equipment, and since there is a global shortage of PPE, we won't start up bat research activities until there is no longer a global shortage of PPE. There is some temporary guidance right now from the National Wildlife Health Center and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that have asked for any monitoring activities that involve handling bats to wait. There's an expert group doing a rapid risk assessment to better understand the risk of potential spill back.
I'm wearing protective gear today, not to protect me from the bat, but to protect the bat from me. In these times right now, we need to be sure that we are not spreading diseases to our wildlife and to the animals that we have in care.
SARS-CoV-2 is in the human population, and if by handling bats, we accidentally transmitted it back into a North American bat species and then transmit bat to bat in our wild bat populations, we don't really know how serious that risk is. In fact, we know there's been a couple cases of some cats and dogs contracting COVID. It does seem like these coronaviruses potentially have a broad mammalian host range, and so wearing face masks, wearing gloves, it likely dramatically reduces any chance of that viral transmission. And those are generally best practices anyway when you're handling with wildlife, is to make sure that you're reducing any chance for any kind of pathogen exchange in any direction. We don't yet know how the novel coronavirus spilled into the human population, and the pandemic that we're experiencing is caused from human to human transmission. What we do know is that this group of beta coronaviruses, which is sort of the family of coronaviruses that the SARS-CoV-2, which is the technical name of the virus that's causing the COVID pandemic. COVID is what we call the disease caused by the virus, and SARS-CoV-2 is the technical name of the virus itself, more commonly called the novel coronavirus. So SARS-CoV-2, the novel coronavirus, is part of this beta coronavirus family. And what we know is that there are lots of different beta coronaviruses found in wild bat populations. It's presumed that original strain of this, what was likely in a bat in China, but how it then got from the bats into the human population is still a scientific mystery and something that people are working on. Oftentimes, those spillover events happen through an intermediate host. There's been some work that suggests that perhaps pangolins are working as the intermediate host in this case, although that's still under active investigation. We just don't know yet exactly how the spillover event happened. Sometimes spillover happens from one species to another. We're most interested and concerned about it when it spills over into the human population. The best thing that we can do with all of the modern tools that we have in society is to be prepared and be ready. You can still have spillover events, but it wouldn't be a global pandemic the way it's played out if we had acted according to the top level guidance of what we should do in these kinds of cases. Like, this is not surprising. All the science told us, A, to expect this, and B, how to handle it when it did happen. And we didn't do those things. So this is not the bat's fault. This is our fault. This isn't any wildlife's fault. This is our fault. Part of being a bat biologist is fighting against this misperception that bats need to be feared and that bats are somehow scary. In some ways, this is a familiar narrative, but now just on like global steroids. Our responsibility in that is to stand up and be the voice for bat conservation and spreading accurate information and speaking up for conservation and the planet. As a global community, we're inappropriately and unsustainably using wildlife and destroying natural habitats. We're invading their habitats. We're harvesting them unsustainably. We're bringing them into super stressful conditions that oftentimes are unsanitary. And those are all the conditions that can lead to this type of spillover event. The most important thing is to be really clear about what we know and what we don't know, be true to the science, and use the science to help us understand how best we can protect people and protect wildlife. Not scapegoat bats, not scapegoat pangolins, not scapegoat wildlife in general. This was a human-created phenomenon through the destructive and unsustainable uses of the way we destroy the planet. Bats are a really important part of biodiversity, full stop. Globally, bats make up nearly a fifth of all mammalian species. Bats are really important pollinators of different plants. They're important seed dispersers. Most bats are insectivorous, and so they're eating nocturnal flying insects. And they're an incredibly important and fascinating group of organisms. One of the things that makes bats so fascinating and interesting and actually really important in the world is that they are capable of harboring a wide diversity of viruses without actually getting sick. This could hold the clues for either treatments or cures or vaccines of having a better understanding of how bats do tolerate different viruses without actually getting sick. There's no risk of getting COVID from watching a bat flight. Right now, those places, I think, qualify as social gathering sites. And so I'd say it may not be safe to go aggregate at those places, not from any risk from the bats, but from the risk of being around a bunch of other people.
The Yolo Bypass wildlife area is still open. As long as we behave ourselves as humans and make the right choices, the state wants to keep that area open. I do see other people periodically, dispersing along the levee to watch the bats fly at night. We are hopeful that as summer moves on, that we're able to take groups of people out. It's a large area. We'll still all be able to see the bats.
Our parks already have a lot of measures in place to protect the bats during their vulnerable periods, whether it be during hibernation or when the bats are congregated for raising their pups in maternity colonies. A lot of the parks already know where some of those colony roosts are and take measures to limit visitor access and disturbance of those colonies. With those measures in place, the bats are already largely protected.
Habitat protection is key. Leaving wild places for wild animals to be wild animals is a critically important part of the solution so that we can have biodiversity, have these animals living in wild places, doing what they should be doing. There's no end to the number of benefits that protected wild places provide. We're connected not only to basically all other people on the planet, but also to other organisms. How important it is to really evaluate the way that we're using nature and using wildlife and really put at the forefront an emphasis on protecting natural habitats and protecting wildlife in ways that don't lead to disturbance and encroachment and ultimately risks to human health. More important than ever is spreading positive messages about bats. Bats don't need to be feared. Bats are not the culprit. Bats are fascinating, valuable, incredible parts of our planet, and they deserve our protection just as much as everything else. Bats are not a threat and do not need to be feared, but rather need to be protected, and need to be protected in their wild places.